Pessoal, não vamos esquecer de acionar o sino.
Olá, combatentes do canal da Guerra. No vídeo anterior, eu falei sobre a obra do Andrei Martyanov. Mas nada melhor, né, para vocês entenderem o pensamento dele, vocês assistirem uma live, entrevista com ele. O doutor Alexandre Guerreiro, nós já entrevistamos aqui no canal, grande amigo nosso aí, um comentarista português, que eu falo sempre que os comentaristas lusos são os melhores do mundo, entrevistou o Andrei Martyanov. Eu liguei para o Dr. Guerreiro, pedi autorização, ele nos autorizou a subir o vídeo, é o vídeo que vocês vão ver agora, tá? Então aproveita, eu peço que vocês aproveitem essa oportunidade para conhecer tanto o canal do Dr. Guerreiro, que está aqui na descrição, ele é um dos melhores comentaristas da Europa, tá? Como o canal e o blog do Andrei Martyanov, bem como também o Twitter do Dr. Alexandre Guerreiro. Então vamos assistir agora, né, a live que o Martyanov fez com o Alexandre Guerreiro, e depois, quem não assistiu também o primeiro vídeo onde eu falei das obras do Martyanov, o link também se encontra aqui na descrição. Vamos à entrevista.
Good evening or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and also good morning for those that are now following us on my YouTube channel from the Americas, not only from Seattle, where my guest is actually presently, but also from any other location in North, Central, and as well as South America. My today's guest was born in Baku, Azerbaijan, then part of the Soviet Union. He graduated from the Kirov Naval Red Banner Academy and served as an officer on the ships and staff position of the Soviet Coast Guard through 1990. He then moved to the United States, where he stays until today, and he's very known for the accuracy of his assessments, as well as for the experience and knowledge he has about Russian military issues. He authored 3 books and several articles, and among his projects, you can find more about his work on the description of this live stream. And I would like to highlight his blog, Reminiscence of the Future, which I follow almost since its beginning. I believe that Andre started it in 2014, but I believe I had the first contact in 2015, and he participates in a lot of places. So frankly, I don't know where he does get enough time to have so many active in participations in a lot of places, and also to be here with us today. But it's a tremendous pleasure to have him, ladies and gentlemen. Here it is, Andrei Martyanov. Dear Andre, on first place, let me thank you for accepting my invitation to be here with us today. Like I told you, a significant part of my audience is based on Portuguese-speaking countries. Not only, but a significant majority is based on countries like Portugal, Brazil, Angola, and Mozambique. And I always like to start my conversation with my foreign guests by trying to realize if is there any kind of kinship between them and my country. So let me ask you, is this the first time you visit Portugal, so to speak?
In terms of, no, I never visited Portugal, but I remember 1984 semi-final of the European Cup between French and Portuguese. And it was a mind-boggling game. Let me put it this, one of the best games ever played in football. I remember Shalana, obviously, at that time, you know, and all kinds of, but yeah, I rooted for Portugal in the European Cup, you know, so it's naturally. So yeah, that's the only kinship, so to speak, with the Portugal. And for Russians, Portugal was always there. You know, obviously everybody remembers Eusebio, no doubt about that. I mean, it's just like legend in his own right. So more along the lines of the football, to put it mildly, but that's how you learn about the world. I wish I was, I could visit, you know, Lisbon and, you know, those other beautiful places. So just, you know.
All right, at least then I believe this is the first time you can visit in a different way, of course. And I hope at least you enjoy and you can come here.
We have been viewing possibility of going through, you know, the Pyrenees, you know, basically tour sort of. So Portugal obviously was on the list, but you know, time. Everything have been completely screwed up since 2020 or 2020. So there we are. So yeah.
Oh, nice. But you were born in Baku, capital of a former Soviet republic, and also located in the Caucasus region. Looking at Azerbaijan's main neighbors, we find out that Armenia has a long history with the Turks and with the Russians. Georgia was the birth country of Joseph Stalin, and Iran was hit by several Western attempts to meddle in the domestic politics. And at the same time, one must also remember that Adolf Hitler was eager to capture Azerbaijan. How was it to live in a country surrounded by these neighbors and by this history?
Well, no, at that time it was the part of the Soviet Union, do not forget, and it was extremely internationalist, so to speak. Baku was always beautiful. I mean, today it's simply drop dead gorgeous city, you know, and it was always like that. Until, of course, Gorbachev came and things started to really just going, tearing on the seams. So, but other than that, even if you look at Baku today, it's absolutely stunning city, and it's a rich history. It was one of the key points of on the Silk Road. Don't forget, it's an ancient city, and so yeah, I still kind of. Well, I was born there. You know, I do feel degree of kinship there. You know, although now it's completely independent country, it's definitely has strong Turkish leaning naturally. So, but yeah, it's the area itself was extremely it's extraordinary in terms of history. You have Iran to the south of the Caspian Sea, and when you look at the history of Iran, especially in 70s and after the dethroning of Shah, the Pahlavi family. So yeah, it's very interesting, to put it mildly, area, so to speak. And now we have the situation with Russia, Azerbaijan, and Iran building the north-south corridor, which is a worst nightmare, by the way, for Europe too. But basically, the idea is to, and it's not just idea; it's being implemented as we speak. Basically, it's going to be something from Murmansk and straight down to basically one of the ports, Enzeli, most likely in Iran, and then by rail to the basically Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf. So we're talking about major transportation corridor.
Do you believe that the old project of Europe from Lisbon to Vladivostok is presently being replaced by that kind of partnership?
Oh, it's completely dead. It's completely dead. It's there was never really anything of substance in this project. And right now, as I already stated, Russia is isolating itself completely willingly, because actually that's the demand of Russian public, a majority of it. They ask for the Iron Curtain, not to allow any kind of, so to speak, cultural, influences from Europe. And if you look attentively at Russian legislature, State Duma, the laws which are being adopted and applauded by the overwhelming majority of Russian population, it is basically all contradictory into the extreme to whatever the cultural values Europe tries to actually develop within the Europe. So culturally, Russia is done with the modern Europe. There is nothing which really ties them together.
And why do you believe is it so hard for people in the West to at least believe that the Russians support that kind of solution that you just mentioned, regardless of whether it is isolationism towards the West or not? But why do you believe it's so hard for people to believe that Putin and the Kremlin have the popular support?
Well, for starters, we have to immediately understand that Western media, as in general, establishment media, they don't have journalists. Those are extremely badly educated people with a very low cultural level, highly uncultured, and so goes for the same for the so-called political elites. Most of them, they are people with a very limited worldview, zero life experiences. Most of them are professional politicians who went through many brainwashing programs, for example, in the Atlanticist community, so to speak, run by the United States, obviously, but also do not forget Europe traditionally, for example, many European people, and let's not just concentrate on the issue of elites, albeit they are the main culprit, but a large swath large portions of European population, they are naturally Russophobic. It's been like this for a long time now, and now it all came to the surface again. And you know what? Another difference today that Russians don't really care at all. I mean, how they perceived in the Europe, you know. And we have basically a repetition of the 1,000 or half a millennium, 500 years cycle of the Europeans, basically, you know, looking at Russia as the enemy, subhumans, you know, Untermensch and things of this nature. And the reason they do that, because, yeah, they are brainwashed. The situation with the education in the Europe is catastrophic. Look at Germany, which commits the suicide. Well, actually, it's already committed suicide. I don't think so they will recover. And when you look at this and you go around Europe, and when you see this, I mean, whatever is happening in Paris now, let me put it this way. They elected Macron, they elected those people, and each nation deserves the government it elects. No matter how we try to frame it that, oh, there was some kind of election irregularities. Maybe possible, but again, the same as in the United States. Were there irregularities? Possible, but again, half of the population voted for Mr. Biden. And now they say, oh, buyer's remorse. Well, you wanted it, you got it. Live with that, you know. And this is their Russian attitude now.
But at the same time, I believe that at first we all thought that maybe Giorgia Meloni could have a different stance towards Russia, because at least publicly she expressed, she gave a kind of hope like that. Even Marine Le Pen also had the same. But I believe that now that kind of speech is kind of fading away from at least the expectations people had. Even President Lula da Silva, who in the recent days just said that he criticized the West for its attitude towards Russia and Ukraine. But now, yesterday, he came with a different speech saying that maybe the Russians shouldn't get the territory that they are actually present at this time. Do you think that in the end there's some kind of fear by these kind of politicians about how could they be seen by the other Western partners?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. Brazil, actually, if you look at Brazil, and please don't quote me on Brazil, because I'm not a specialist in Brazil. I don't know Portuguese. So, and most of my life, not all of it, but most of my life, I rooted against Brazilian national team. So Pepe Escobar is going to go ballistic now when he hears that. No, there were times when I rooted for them, actually. But point is, Brazil is a most important country in the South America by sheer size, and so, but they are also sadly as a basically backyard of the United States. And we have here the continental politics between South and US, North and South. So you would expect Lula, who have been imprisoned, I believe, so to play it kind of, you know, or to trying to sit on the two chairs. And it's probably only natural. But we have to understand that even within the BRICS, actually the triangle which really drives it is, of course, China, Russia, and India. These are three big ones, you know, so, and this is what everything revolves around now economically. So, and as per Meloni, she's Atlanticist, and that's it. So she can say whatever she wants, you know, so it's all fake. It's all for the, you know, placating whatever the part of the public which might have some understanding of the catastrophe which is unfolding, essentially. So, and I don't take them seriously, any of them.
Yes, neither we. But you were in Azerbaijan on the 17th March 1991, when the Soviet Union referendum took place. According to the numbers,
No, I wasn't already then. I wasn't already then. No. But the point is, I know where you're going with this. Azerbaijan was 1 second after the Russian Federation Republic, where 78%, I believe, voted for preservation of the Soviet Union.
94%.
94%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. So, and you know, it's difficult to explain now. But again, it's water under the bridge. The Soviet Union was demolished, primarily for the internal reasons, and it's kind of what are you gonna do? You know. So.
But do you believe that there's some kind of feeling presently in Azerbaijan that people miss the times when they belonged to the Soviet Union, or not really?
Some of them are, of course, no doubt about it. And don't forget, Azerbaijan has, it's not official, but Russian language is widely used in Azerbaijan. And there are many public schools which they have those Russian sectors where they speak Russian, they teach in Russian. And so it's, don't forget about Aliyev family. And no matter what everybody says, and there certainly there are reasons to believe that there is a corruption and things of this nature happening there. But the point is, Gidar Aliyev, the father of Ilham Aliyev, the president of, they were very good friends with Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget, when Gidar Aliyev died, Vladimir Putin was there at his funeral. And there's a lot of personal relations between Aliyev family and Vladimir Putin. So it's a very important factor.
Okay. So, and what made you go to the United States of America? I know that I have read in a lot of places that you took part in the events in the Caucasus, which led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. I know that, but many of our viewers don't know the history behind it. What actually made you go to the United States of America? Like you said, on 1991, you weren't already in Azerbaijan.
Yeah, after the events of 1988 and 1990, and Karabakh war kind of swinging in full power, first, I already by that time, I retired. Because of the health issues, they didn't have simply the position for me of not going to sea, because I was disqualified from going to sea because of I had the issues with the ulcers on the stomach. And at that time, especially on the types of the ships we served, it was basically verboten, forbidden, So they found me the temporary position as the flag specialist in the staff of the brigade, but then there were other things which I had to consider, and the Soviet Union started to basically disintegrate. Soviet Union didn't just die on the 1991 when Shukhevich, Kravchuk, and Yeltsin signed the dissolution papers. It was dying already since 87, 88, and I'm not going to be talking about the ethnic dynamics there. But the 88 through 90 were absolute chaos, which was happening in Soviet Union, and especially its ethnic fringes, so to speak, different nationalities. And yes, that's how it broke up, essentially, And the fact is, the special military operation today, it's also the part of the problem, and this is the, so to speak, the echo, harking back to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the way it was organized by basically criminals, crooks, and other people like Yeltsin, alcoholics, and and in this case we had no option but to basically abandon everything, and just we moved.
Okay, nice. Having in mind your third book, Disintegration Indicators of the Coming American Collapse, you actually support the idea that the United States are failing on their several attempts to remain as a global superpower. Do you believe that this is somehow comparable to what you write also in your book about the so-called the paradox of the collapse of the Soviet Union? Is there any kind of paradox in the United States case?
Well, there are some parallels, that's for sure. So I won't say that they are necessarily symmetrical. I mean, obviously Soviet Union collapse was precipitated by the, we would call this ethnic elites in all those republics. Kazakhstan, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan was the last one, but especially Baltic states And Middle Asia, yeah, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and all those stans, they suddenly wanted to be separate. They wanted to suck on Russia's fat feet, but also be independent and basically have their fiefdoms. And that's exactly what happened. There is a huge ethnic tension and racial tension in the United States, obviously. That's the parallel which we can always kind of observe. And much of it was also being stoked by the so-called Americans left, which is not really left. There's nothing left in the Democratic Party, let alone, so they are basically, yeah, it's so there are some parallels. But then, of course, the United States never understood its own limitations in terms of what it can do and economically, and it was deindustrialized with such a speed. It's in historical terms, it's absolutely astonishing.
But you believe that the Roman empires, let me call it this way, it's falling apart.
Yeah, it is falling apart in many respects. Yeah, will it stay together? It's the whole other story, But I think so that the more the economic problems begin to dawn on the United States, and they are dawning, the more we'll have the issues of which we already have, the lawlessness, mobs running amok. We have the catastrophic situation with the drugs. Be them hard drugs or be them some kind of opioids or what have you. The whole world now knows what the Kensington Avenue in Philadelphia is. You can look it up on YouTube. People look at it and they just, it's some places in the United States now look like the slums. Actually, not like, they are slums. So, and when you look at this hasn't been the case even 25 years ago. Now it is all, I mean, the situation with they have feces control now in San Francisco because it stinks with the, feces, basically, the centers of San Francisco. And when you look at this, it's just like, good God, this used to be the first world country. It's not anymore. There are some remnants here and there. If you look at Seattle, for example, it's gone. Seattle, which used to be, it's not there anymore. It's a grim, dark place. And they had even a couple of years ago, their documentary, one of the Seattle, I believe, Como 4 News station, they made this thing which won actually a number of their international awards for the documentaries. It's called just like that, Seattle is Dying. Well, let me tell you, Seattle is dead.
Yeah, already.
Yeah, and it happens everywhere.
I just saw recently one documentary about Vancouver, which is actually on the same situation like you described on some...
No, it's Canada. Yeah, it's not far from us, 2.5 hours of drive. Yeah, they're going down the drain. Canada is going down the drain pretty much.
But this seems like to be a problem, a nationwide problem, not only in some locations. So not only in the United States, but also in Canada. And people still, I believe that they still believe in the so-called American dream. And they think that the American dream does not include that kind of reality. But to what extent do you believe that all this situation could be the main reason why the United States cannot win the present conflict with Russia in Ukraine?
Well, because the United States, there's a purely military issue of which I will be making video after we're done, talking here. And the issue here is purely militarily and military industrial. Military issue is simple that America's TOE, so to speak, table of organization and equipment for the United States Armed Forces is not designed to find the peer-to-peer war. There have been a very dangerous, in many respects, delusion, doctrinal delusion, which put every single egg in the single basket of the air power. They never learned the history of the United States or how the World War II was really fought. They thought that, obviously, the U.S. aviation obviously played a key role in the West, together with the British, Royal Air Force. But they didn't understand that the real war was happening actually on the East, with the meat grinder and basically annihilating 80% of the creme de la creme of the Wehrmacht and Axis forces. But when you don't have the direct contact with it, no matter what Eisenhower tells you or Montgomery, institutionally, you cannot now follow it, and you begin to basically push yourself from the experiences which you had, apart from the fact that American doctrinal thinking was very largely colored by the Germans, by the Wehrmacht.
Indeed.
There you go. So you have the guys who got their ass handed to them on the Eastern Front. They are, of course, so losers. They're being important in the United States, and they begin to read lectures on how to fight the war. The question, obviously, guys, you just lost one, okay? The greatest war in the, and then, of course, this thinking colors American military thinking. And when you look at this, it's just, they took a lot from Wehrmacht, and they didn't study much of the Red Army.
Indeed.
And then when you suddenly, and guess what? Then suddenly you get involved into this war, and you understand that you don't have industry even to support it, because real war is, that's the real war.
And so it means that, for example, the Russian military doctrine might include at least some kind of planning in the long term that now allows Putin to say yes to this kind of special military intervention. Is that it? Because he knows that he has enough resources.
Yeah, it's all about resources based. And Russians are, well, I know professionally, have background on it. Russian general staff, Russians war colleges, military academy. They stick you with all those operational training type things, not just tactics. And you study theory of operations. And theory of operations is all about how you operate those networks, how you calculate required forces, what it takes to supply those forces, and things of this nature. And then you have those guys from Pentagon who lost to Iraq and lost to Afghanistan with the guys with the sandals, AK-47s and RPG, and they want to fight not just peer power. Some Russian military technologies are absolutely deadly. The United States will not have them for a long time, if ever. And then they encounter this, and of course their jaw drops, and the only things their plan goes immediately bust within the first months of the operation, because they think that they are good at planning. They are not.
No, yeah. They thought that the Russian economy at least was going to sink in a record time. And then how could they think about that?
Very simple. They think that General Patton was great general. Yeah, they think that what you produced, those virtual money, are a real economy. In Holland and in Germany now, the prostitution and drug use is counted as a gross domestic product. So what do you expect? The real size of American economy is smaller, and we're talking about tangible, is smaller than that of India. Forget China. China dwarfs United States economically. When I tell people China produces 12 times more steel than United States and 3.5 times more automobiles than the United States. Some people don't even understand those things. And now there's another thing. Russia produces as much steel as the United States. And well, we're talking about then aerospace, we're talking about the other things, and then they cannot even grasp this because they are not taught this. They taught modern monetary theory, they taught finances. Not that finances are not important, but they are taught finances from the point of view of Wall Street, how to make money. And they make money out of thin air by creating those virtual economy. And then suddenly they think that, oh yeah, let's write out this 23 trillion GDP. Well, in reality, it's probably around 8, in real terms. Not to speak about the national debt, and they go against the country, which is, my gosh, they should study Russia's history. They don't understand what Russian military industrial complex is. They believe in this, those delusions which dissidents like Solzhenitsyn and others, and current dissidents and liberal so-called opposition, while in reality, most of them, they're front for many NGOs, American and European. They tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And then now you have the sudden, encounter with the reality, and oh my God, we are screwed. Of course you are screwed. Russia can use 3,000 tanks a year if need be. So there you go.
And the cherry on the bottom, on the top of the cake, is actually that ideology of the gender equality and the LGBT on the top of the hierarchy of the U.S. Army, for example. And there's a commandment that must be followed. But at the same time, I think it's very weird here in the West that people don't understand the Russian military approach. In case, for example, the strategy of attrition that Russia has in order to let the other side, the enemy, falls by itself with the time going on. But at the same time, here people think that withdrawals, strategic withdrawals, actually are losses. It's so hard to try to explain, but what does this has to do with the Russian identity?
Well, those people who think so, they are definitely militarily incompetent. As they saw this Gulf War I thing where they beat the crap, pardon my French, from some third-rate military which was underarmed, undertrained. Much of it was actually illiterate. So, and they like, oh my God. Well, and obviously Iraqis didn't have air force per se. They had the air defense of the times, for biblical times and things of this nature, And they think, oh my God, we did this, Well, yeah, sure. You can do there some kind of those maneuver warfare, but in reality, Russians knew from the get-go that they will be fighting not just Ukraine, and that eventually the West will be completely throwing everything they got behind Ukraine. So, and that is why they allowed the combined West to invest heavily into this. And now you see yourself, they are Russians Russians are currently in the strategic defense position. Strategic defense absolutely doesn't mean that you do not attack. You attack. In fact, it is from the strategic defense where the counter offensives usually start, So, and you look at this, and they throw everything into these meat grinder, and Russians say, yeah, give me more. Because they also keep a classic Russian idea of the, let's keep the cauldron open a little bit, and let them try to supply it even more, because the more they supply it, the more they annihilate it on the way in and on the way out. And you have this basically enclosed circle of the recycling of the personnel. Does it sound horrible? Absolutely. But it's war. I mean, it's still special military operation. The reason it's not a real war because there are still very many restrictions imposed on the Russian forces in terms of the civilian population and, avoiding unnecessary losses and victims, especially among civilians. But even in this mode, we have kill ratio 1 to 10. So. And then, of course, now you have the increased activity and acceleration of the operational tempo of Russian aviation, because basically the air defense have been finally suppressed to the point that you have almost unopposed close air support.
Yeah.
And when you look at this, yes, this is all about annihilation of what Putin stated. The denazification and demilitarization. What is demilitarization? Demilitarization is the annihilation of the mobilizational potential of the enemy. What is the mobilizational potential of the enemy? This is its personnel, which could be recruited or drafted as the military force, its military industrial facilities, and of course the transportation which deals with that, supplying this. And this has been accomplished already largely, and Russians fight the third iteration of the Ukrainian armed forces. So there you go.
And what about the demilitarization of NATO itself?
Yes, it's as I already stated, when they try to push this idea about this. Oh my God, we're going to send Challenger. Oh my God, we will send the Leopard 2. Russia said, please send them in, you know, because we know. Do you hear much now about those Patriots, NASAMs, and all those? No, not much, really, because most of them have been annihilated, you know. So it doesn't matter what they send there. And that's what gets us back to the start of our conversation. It is the TOE, Table of Organization and Equipment. NATO TOE today, it's not designed to fight serious military force, let alone nuclear superpower. They just not, you know, those people, you have to understand, well, while fighting with Afghanistan and Iraq, they could have put their, for example, their staff and headquarters in Kuwait and feel absolutely safe. Anybody in Brussels, everybody knows their addresses, they know where their bunkers are, and there is no defense against it. If need be, and it doesn't have to be nuclear weapon. Mr. Kinjal, with its penetrating ability of 200 meters in depth, and with its Mach 10 hypersonic speed, it will gladly, you know, do the surgical strike in case of, you know. So suddenly they have the enemy which easily strikes conventionally on the operational depth, which is about from the 100 to 700 kilometers. And if need be, it will strike on the strategic depths with conventional weapons. You remember how many times Russia ran out of the missiles? Well, guess what? Every day Russia runs out of missiles for the last 12 months, but still cannot run out of them, you know? So. And there you go.
I remember that back in November 2022, the Russian government actually promised to reinforce the army and to deploy new sophisticated weapons in the Donbass. What kind of weaponry do you think they were speaking about?
Oh, well, I think so. What they were talking about was primarily electronic warfare, which evidently has a dramatic effect. For example, just recent news, even Raytheon and White House, sort of, you know, that's mostly through their propaganda outlets like Washington Post and New York Times, they have to admit that JDAMs, all those, you know, the gliding smart bombs, they are not working there. You know why? Because the signal is suppressed, they miss. And Russians also managed to burn their primers, so they don't even explode, many of them. Not only they miss. So, and when you look at these weapons, and there is another story which many still do not want to reconcile themselves in the West. The performance of Russian air defense is astounding. It is mind-boggling. There was never in the history anything like this. I am kind of salivating when the first official reports after the end of the major hostilities will start to pour out, because I want to see the numbers of Russian air defense, because it is mind-boggling. No. So it completely overturns the whole concept of the NATO. At first it was the land-air battle, now it's multi-domain battle. And you know what, even RAND people admitted that about the Air Force attacks. And yeah, as Mr. Rachmanik, the big honcho in RAND Corporation for air operation, admitted, if we fight Russia or China, you know, let alone them together, we get our ass handed to us on the plate, because we will not be able to actually take off most of, you know, get airborne most of our aircraft. They will be annihilated on the ground. And then, of course, after that, you see what happened, you know. Yeah. And when you look at these numbers, it's just, they sit there. I am on record. You can quote me on that. In Pentagon, they sit with their jaws on the floor. They never saw anything like this in their lives. And that's a real shock and awe, because Russians fighting there, not just rather robust. At that time, Ukrainian army, VSU, armed forces, they were the largest European and probably most combat capable force in the West.
Yeah.
But now this force is decimated completely. It's gone. And now you have the NATO equipment being, you know, obliterated in the industrial quantities.
Absolutely. But at the same time, you are a Navy official. But we haven't seen much of Russian Navy. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we haven't seen much of Russian Navy so far. Is this some kind of trick that soon we will see, or?
No. Russian Navy was actively involved in the standoff weapons. Don't forget, Caspian Flotilla, Black Sea Fleet. They strike targets all the time. They use 3 M14 calibers. So the forces of the Black Sea Fleet and Caspian Flotilla are engaged very much so. But don't forget that Russian Navy is it's a strategic force. And let me put it this way. U.S. Navy and NATO navies have a lot of their underwater submarine assets right now in the ocean. Guess what? It means that Russian Navy has to deal with the anti-submarine warfare issues. So there's a lot of activity going on there. It's just that obviously it is not as, because you have to understand the naval warfare is completely different story altogether, and God forbid if somebody is sunk, like many people assume was the case with cruiser Moskva. Now I can tell you one thing. I do not know the whole story, but it is absolutely almost 99% probability fact, which was established. These were not Ukrainian or British or whatever American anti-ship missiles. Something happened on board of the cruiser itself.
Yeah.
And we can speculate here whatever you want, but no, it hasn't been sunk by NATO weapons or by Ukrainian weapons. We can obviously kind of tacitly admit that it could have been the sabotage, but we don't know.
Like it happened in other military bases, not only in Crimea, but elsewhere. That actually happened. It could be like, and at the same time, and at the same time, it could serve as a propaganda in order to inspire the Ukrainians to continue fighting and to believe that they are actually being effective. But at the same time, what I regret the most is that in many Telegram channels, I stopped watching them and reading them because a lot of those analysts, commentators, they tend to follow a certain narrative that I don't think has much to do with military tactics and military reality.
No.
So,
most of Telegram channels on this matter, they are manned by people who are absolutely amateurs, including many of those military reporters who have zero military background. Certainly, many people can put on the helmet, and full metal jacket, and run around the front lines. And it takes obviously some courage, no doubt about it. But unless you have a professional military background, I don't read the Telegram channels. Although funny enough, today some Telegram channels send me the offer, can you work for us? We're going to pay you, just commenting on things. Hey, I don't even have Telegram channel. It's a horrible platform. And, we'll see. But the point is, I agree with you. Most of those military reporters and Telegram channel analysts, they're neither. They're basically hype, people who use hype to promote their own agenda and make money. Finance.
You know that for 7 years I worked for the Portuguese intelligence services, and one thing that we wanted more than nothing else wasn't the assessments. We just wanted the facts. Then with the facts, we can make and produce our own assessments.
Exactly.
That's the most independent way to create intelligence and reliable information. But I don't think that this actually happens presently because people tend to follow and to believe the narratives that actually confirm their own beliefs and their wishful thinking, actually. So I think this actually prejudices and creates some kind of hysteria in the society. But on the ground, many people start to face reality, because now they see that the so-called Ukrainian counteroffensive, that it was supposed to be in the last fall, then now spring, summer. When can we actually expect any kind of Ukrainian counteroffensive? What do you think, if any, of course?
well, first we have to start with the fact that nobody ever informs anybody about what they're going to do in terms of counteroffensive or anything else to start with.
Yeah.
And here we have the issue, which I am on record, and again, you can quote me. People in Washington and in the European capitals, they are so incompetent that the only thing they can do is to create narratives. That's why they cannot run, they cannot govern, they cannot militarily plan, they don't understand how real economy works. So not all of them, but majority. And that is why they need to live in narratives. And don't forget, practically all of the Western politics today is reduced to the show. It's basically show off. And it's a show business, basically. And that's why you have to constantly create those narratives. So, counteroffensive. We live in the 21st century, you know. If you remember the Operation Citadel in July 1943, Russians were assuming that Hitler will try to sniff out this, you know, bulge around the Kursk, because it was only natural strategic direction. And that's why Zhukov, Rokossovsky, you know, and Vasilevsky, they say, okay, we're making the defense here. But they had very little data, you know, in terms of, so obviously they had the Red Orchestra, which was warning them. They had other German officers and people who have been captured or surrendered who said, yeah, something big is coming in July. So this was the level, you know, you had the human intel information and you kind of operate on this. Well, you know what happened, famous Kursk battle, the slaughter of unimaginable scale. So let's kind of fast forward to 2023. We live in the world of the ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance complex, which is for people even in 1960s and would have been read as the science fiction. We literally can see and understand what a squad or a platoon is doing, what its plan, where it's going, where the main forces are grouping, you know, where they pre-deploy for something. So it's ridiculous to think that, you know, oh yeah, we created some counteroffensive. The Russians know, for example, that between present Artyomovsk, Bakhmut, and Chasiv Yar, they have a grouping of about 80,000 personnel, the armed forces of Ukraine. It's the last resource, essentially. So it doesn't mean that they throw 80,000 simultaneously. You have to have the appropriate logistics. You have to have appropriate transportation. You have to have appropriate forces to do anything. And when you are stretched constantly, that was Russian strategy from the get-go. You are stretched constantly along the 1,000+ kilometers front. What are you going to do? How are you going to concentrate forces when you know that Russians have the same satellites as Americans do? Americans feed their information about Russian moves to armed forces of Ukraine, but Russians have superb constellation and they have superb human intel on the ground there. So, I mean, it's ridiculous, you know. So, yeah, sure, let them attack at Zaporizhzhia to Melitopol. They want to cut this thing. Yes, Russians are so stupid, they do not even understand what is going on. It's ridiculous, you know. So, yeah, they will try to do something for the PR purpose.
Yeah.
Obviously, they will start doing something. They will encounter the first line of defense. There will be a slaughter there, you know. And everything what they were using in terms of the armor, it will be probably destroyed already on the first line. So, but good luck, you know.
But what do you actually think that Russia should be using presently in order to put an end to this conflict? And I'm not even going to speak about the nuclear weapons because I believe that's Western nonsense theories. But how do you think that Russians should change their approach in order to put an end to this conflict?
Oh, no changing of the approach for now. Because it suits Russia very well, because it does what have been from the get-go a grand strategy objective, which is demilitarization. I'm sorry to say, but yes, it is killing as many enemy as possible. This is the part of the war. And why do you have to go to enemy when you allow the enemy go to you? And in the end, it's gonna pay off also in terms of the gross reduction of the what was the idea of people in Washington, State Department, or the National Security Team that, oh yeah, let's create Afghanistan 2.0 for Russians. First, they didn't study Afghanistan 1.0 to start with, which Russia, Soviet Union didn't really lose. Then, of course, they didn't study their own Afghanistan. And yet those people continue to think in those stupid cliches. And that's what I'm saying. They are, I mean, as one friend of mine, senior officer, which is central apparatus of Ministry of Defense of Russia, he stated, they're not going to outthink us. They're not. Because people understand how they think. They think in cliches, period.
Nice to know. I have to say to tell people that Andrei cannot stay for much longer, but I still have 2 more questions before he. We have a lot of people here trying to give also their opinions about not only about your excellent job, but also your excellent work, but also about this conflict. They usually come here and they like to share their opinion. Sure. But one of the last questions that I want to ask you is, how much longer do you think Ukrainian NATO will be able to hold?
I don't know. It's difficult to say. I hate to be Cassandra on this issue. I always make mistakes in terms of the time frame. But I think so. You have to understand the Kremlin operates on the basis of the other grand strategy. And one of the part of the grand strategy, you probably remember in December 2021, so-called Russian ultimatum. Russia knows what the United States is doing in terms of basically crushing the, trying to crush the global economy, trying to, by any means, maintain some kind of hold on power of neocons in the United States. They also understand what is happening to Europe. The trend is absolutely clear that Europe will suffer even more until it actually happens some social upheaval, which we can only imagine. We look at France, for example.
But many people believe that Ukraine sooner won't have any more men to mobilize and to...
No, that's the possibility. Yeah, that's the possibility. They are from whatever, 5th or 6th, I don't even remember. I lost count of the waves of mobilization, and they already have people like 17-year-old boys and a 65-year-old man who, yeah, we get this. But you have to understand, Ukraine is a small fish. Larger fish is about the remaking of the world global order. And you cannot remake this global order until you put the West in its appropriate place and reshuffle the whole power structure, power balance. And that's what and again, you can quote me on that. Most people in Washington, they do not understand how power balance is formed. They don't. It's like you look at those political science or international relations departments. They have no clue. They really still think that United States defeated Hitler. So, and when you have, and again, when you had late Madeleine Albright, certified 100% USDA approved war criminal who teaches diplomacy there, what do you expect? What do you expect? And that's what it is.
But maybe people presently, not only in Russia, but here in the West, I always advise people, please read Karl Schmidt. Because Karl Schmidt is still a great author that allows us to understand how not only Russia sees the geopolitics, but also how every country in the world should see and look at geopolitics. Karl Schmidt, he's still very, very, very present, and I don't see many people speaking about him. And right?
Look at the American so-called intellectual milieu, intellectual environment, which produced one academic failure after another. Be that Fukuyama's the end of the history. It's he became a joke, really. I don't understand how people still even quote him. You look at Brzezinski. those people pretend to be intellectuals. They know nothing, literally. I mean, you read this, it's just ridiculous. They have no clue. The same, oh my gosh, it's yeah, it's funny, you know. And now when they finally, you know, Russians lost the patience, and you know, so there you go.
No, because I think it's quite fancy to mention some authors and to mix some ideas and to seem, well, I'm very intelligent and I have a vision no one else has. Maybe there's a reason why only that person sees that way, but this is a problem that they all have to deal with. One last question, Andre. What do you think actually people should know about Russia and Ukraine? I know, and I've read your contents about you were quite skeptical about who was behind the attack against Vladimir Tatarsky. I read your opinion, I followed your opinion there. And at the same time, do you believe that in the future Ukraine could pose a threat to Russia in the similar to the threat ISIS presently does, not only to Russia but to other countries? I mean, as an asymmetrical threat.
No, there should be obviously some, so to speak, blowback, if you wish, you know, and depending on what will be left of Ukraine, I think so it's going to be reduced to primarily several oblasts around Kiev, you know, and eventually Russia will deal with this land bridge between Kherson and Transnistria, which implies the Odessa and Nikolaev. Will there be a symmetry? Oh, absolutely. The special services in the West and the NATO will continue to provide some kind of the support, and you know, but again, there is FSB. It has been pretty, how to put it, effective for the most part, to putting down those asymmetrical threats. And again, don't forget ISIS. They were on the basically fundamentalist ideology. What it takes in Ukraine, even considering the incredible level of brainwashing of the population, it takes really not that much to reduce this threat asymmetrical dramatically. Just look at Mariupol and those oblasts in Ukraine. Yes, there is still a Ukrainian element. Yes, there are diversionary groups. But look at Mariupol, the way it is being restored, and people get their new flats, and their, you know, normal life is returning. This is the main thing. And of course, after that, there are hidden, not always, you know, PR-driven work starts when people begin to say, "Hey, we live much better than, you know, we did before." And believe me, once they get the most shocking thing for any Ukrainian who goes to Russia is the fact that they are told that Russians don't have enough toilets, and they steal toilets, and that use microchips from washing machines, and that when Russians enter former Ukrainian territories, they begin to take those, you know, it's like, yeah, okay. And then, of course, get them to Russia, not necessarily to Moscow, because Moscow is overwhelming even for many Americans, because they never saw it. I'm talking about, like, you know, just regular, like Belgorod, you know, Krasnodar, or, you know, Perm, like, you live much better than we ever did. Yeah, I mean, well, the worst part for them is that Russians begin to live better than Europeans. That's another thing which is absolutely mind-boggling, and that's what many people do not understand.
Indeed, people should go to Moscow. I always say this to people, because even according to the United Nations Habitat, Moscow was considered the best metropolis to live, with the best quality of life over dozens of other cities. So this is just straight facts. But if people get to know Moscow and other Russian cities, they will fall in love for the city and for everything that it has. Mr. Andrei Martyanov, thank you very much for joining and for being with us today, and for helping us to understand Russia and all this conflict at the same time. I hope to see you here again, and to have you here in the future. And also my audience, my viewers, maybe later you can find here people sending some comments to you and thanking you for your impressive job. So I'm just going to say goodbye to them, and then please just don't leave this meeting yet. I just want to give you a few words after this. But thank you everyone who was here joining and following our conversation. I hope you keep watching our forthcoming events and also our forthcoming live streams with the assessment on the Ukrainian conflict. Thank you very much and have a great day, everyone.